A special welcome for those who have traveled from distant countries. For you, a very warm welcome to the United States of America. And for all, welcome to Brandeis University. The host of our conference over the next 2.5 days is the Center for Global Development and Sustainability at the Hiller School for Social Policy and Management. So let me tell you in just a couple of minutes a little bit about our center. GDS is an interdisciplinary and multinational group that advances scholarship and applied research on problems of vulnerability in developing countries as well as in advanced economies. Our core faculty and affiliated researchers include those from varied disciplines of the natural and social sciences, development studies, and the humanities, including philosophy and legal studies. Engagement with partners in the United States and overseas is crucial to us in building, understanding, and expanding capacity for sustainable and what I call emancipatory development. We work on overcoming vulnerability to climate change among small farmers in the Horn of Africa, to dengue fever in South Asia, to developing new university governance and financial models for the Prime Minister's office in Sri Lanka. What binds all the work of GDS together, and indeed all the work of the 10 research centers and institutes at the Hiller School for Social Policy and Management, are issues of vulnerability that erode or deny the benefits of development to populations at risk. We're an applied research center and think tank that produces scholarship and plans practical solutions to sustain and enhance well-being throughout the world. While our mission is broad and our footprint large, we work on intersecting teams that are highly focused and specialized. We have staying power too and plot our own course in partnerships with some of the world's leading institutions of higher learning, such as the Brack University School of Public Health, global development and civil society organizations such as Oxfam and the American Jewish World Service, and private foundations such as the evaluation we just completed of the midday school feeding program in Lucknow, India, which we did for the Akshapatra Foundation, an evaluation study headed by my colleague, Professor Joseph Hassan, that just days ago won the Hiller School's 2017 Best Research Team Award that we are very proud of. To offer his personal welcome to Brandeis and to this important meeting, I'm delighted and honored to welcome the Brandeis University President, Ronald Leibowitz.
Thank you, Larry. Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome you to this international conference on reimagining religion, caste, and social justice in South Asia, with an especially warm welcome to those of you who have traveled a great distance to be here. We have delegations from South Asian universities with us, as well as leaders of social movements against caste discrimination. We also have many of our own faculty, staff, and students in attendance as well. Brandeis is a most fitting host for this third annual conference on social exclusion in South Asia. This university's connection to the topic of the conference is deep and abiding. Eleanor Roosevelt, a founding trustee of Brandeis, was the chair of the United Nations Human Rights Commission and credited with the inspiration for the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which she called an international Magna Carta for all mankind. The words of that declaration, that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights, ring as true and urgent today, perhaps even more so, as they did 68 years ago. Incidentally, Brandeis was also founded 68 years ago, and Eleanor Roosevelt served as commencement speaker to our first graduating class in 1952. The issues she embraced and advocated are not only part of our Brandeis history, they are tightly woven into the fabric of our university's culture and outlook. As Larry Simon, the director of the Center for Global Development and Sustainability and our conference chair describes it, caste oppression is among the greatest human rights problems in the world today. The center's focus on caste is strongly aligned with Brandeis's own commitment to scholarship and the engagement of ideas for the betterment of society, or as it's known in the Jewish tradition, tikkun olam, or repairing the world. The persistence of caste should be a human rights issue for all of us, and I'm grateful that this conference is drawing attention to it in the United States. I look forward to the opening panel discussion this afternoon with Cornel West of Harvard Divinity, Sukhadeo Thorat of the Indian Council for Social Science Research, and Rajesh Singh of the St. John Fisher College. We are grateful to the Boston Study Group, through whose generosity a bronze bust of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar will be dedicated tomorrow evening in the Brandeis Library. We are honored to be only the second university in America after Ambedkar's alma mater, Columbia University, to receive such a distinction. Dr. Ambedkar, who rose from his untouchable status in rural India to become the chief architect of the Indian Constitution, is an example of the important role everyone, when not limited by predetermined social status, can play in improving the world. I wish you every success with this important conference. I want to again welcome our guests from abroad, to extend our gratitude to our distinguished speakers and panelists, and to salute Larry Simon and his leadership of the Center for Global Development and Sustainability for doing great work on important topics such as religion, caste, and social justice. Thank you.
Thank you, President Leibowitz. If you will, permit me just 2 minutes more to tell you why we are engaged in this issue. Our affiliated faculty and researchers have decades of experience in developing countries, living and working with the poor and marginalized. That touchstone remains our test against fancy talk and theories disconnected from the lived experience on the ground. That is why we bring together in conferences such as this, not just world-class academics who are here, but also leaders and activists from social movements against caste. I believe fervently that all social theory must be grounded in the realities and perceptions of the poor, the marginalized, and the oppressed. Our conferences on caste, therefore, are a modest effort to encourage the dual nature of social theory, reflection, and praxis. This is not a perfect dialogue, and debate and divergence is a necessary part of any learning community. We are bound together in our efforts around caste by an essential tenet of our faith in democracy, that intolerance and age-old legacies of oppression, wherever they are rooted, even in my own country, must be acknowledged and overcome. Religion-based intolerance deeply embedded itself many centuries ago in the structure of Indian society, in the form of casteism and especially untouchability. Even today, despite constitutional and legal prohibitions against discrimination, over 200 million Dalits in India alone are largely blocked from the full benefits of the new economy, and many live lives in abject poverty and social abuse. Perhaps nowhere on earth is the social divide forced and reinforced by anachronistic ideas of birth-based hierarchy so evident and so tragic. Some hope that economic modernization will lead to a modernizing society that will sweep caste and untouchability into the waste bin of history, as Marx once predicted. To some extent, increasing urbanization has dulled the sharp edge of caste, where urban settings permit a greater mixing of people in public spaces. But for Dalits today, that mobility and modernization is still limited, and their leadership is looking both within India, Nepal, and other countries, and globally, for a dialogue on the conundrum in which they find themselves, namely profound marginalization in a quasi-religious culture and social order, greatly in need of reformation and emancipation. So why does a research center on global development and sustainability devote itself to problems of caste? Because the main pillar of sustainable development has always been and will remain one of ethics, of fairness and tolerance and love of humanity in all its diversity. So I'm pleased to open this conference now. Tomorrow we will introduce our collaborating institutions whose hard work made this conference possible. They include the Indian Institute of Dalit Studies from New Delhi, the India-China Institute from the New School in New York, the Center for the Study of Social Exclusion and Inclusive Policy at the National Law School of India University, the Boston Study Group, the W.E.B. Du Bois Department of Afro-American Studies at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst, the Ambedkar International Mission, USA, and our own, here at Brandeis, our own International Center for Ethics, Justice, and Public Life. We have over 150 people registered for this conference who will deliver over 45 scholarly papers, plus 5 roundtable discussions on social movements, and 6 plenary speakers, including those who will begin the conference right now. It is my great pleasure to welcome my colleague and old friend Rajesh Sampath, who in turn will introduce and moderate a conversation among 3 extraordinary people and public intellectuals, Professors Cornel West, Rajesh Singh, and Sukhadeo Thorat. Thank you.
I'd love to welcome you to this very special session on the 3rd annual conference here at Brandeis University on the unfinished legacy of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. Would like to introduce our panelists and have them come up after I make some other acknowledgments. But we certainly are thrilled and humbled and honored to have Professors West, Singh, and Thorat here at Brandeis University. And I look forward to introducing their bios to you momentarily. But in terms of acknowledgments, I'd like to thank the President Leibowitz, Provost Lynch, SVP Flagel, and just impromptu, I'd like to improvise. I saw the Chief Diversity Officer, Mark Brimhall Vargas, who's there, and the President of the Senate, Susan Kernan, is in the back, and other distinguished colleagues, faculty, staff, and students. Thank you for joining us today. One quick acknowledgement. I really would like to thank and acknowledge the tireless effort of our chair and convener, Professor Lawrence Simon, and through the assistance of our soon-to-be joint MA in SID and Women and Gender and Sexuality Studies, Jaspreet Mahal, and our colleague from Harvard, Suraj Yenda, who was kind enough to make an introduction to Dr. West. So please give them a round of applause for this. So now I'd like to introduce our guests to join me on the stage, and I will have them take a seat, and I'll give us the agenda for this afternoon, and then we can proceed to our questions. So please welcome Professors West, Thorat, and Singh. A brief introduction of the bios of our distinguished speakers. Professor Cornel West is a prominent and provocative Democratic intellectual. He is Professor of Practice of Public Philosophy at Harvard Divinity School with a dual appointment in the African American Studies Department. He has been the Professor of Philosophy and Christian Practice at Union Theological Seminary and is Professor Emeritus at Princeton University. He's also taught at Yale, Harvard, and the University of Paris. Dr. West graduated magna cum laude from Harvard in 3 years and obtained his MA and PhD in philosophy at Princeton. Professor West has written over 20 books and has edited 13. Though he's best known for his classics Race Matters, Democracy Matters, and for his memoir Brother West, Living and Loving Out Loud, his most recent releases Black Prophetic Fire and Radical King were received with critical acclaim. Jebaroja Singh was born and brought up in Chennai, South India, and is currently visiting assistant professor at St. John Fisher's College in the Department of Sociology and Women and Gender Studies. In Rochester, New York, Professor Singh's ongoing research in social activism focus on intersections of caste, class, gender, and rural India, as evident in the lives, experiences, leadership strategies, and oral narratives in cultural expressions of the Dalit communities of women in South India. Professor Singh holds a PhD in comparative literature from Rutgers University and is president of Dalit Solidarity Forum in the United States, a nonprofit organization committed to the social and economic progress of the Dalit community. Finally, Professor Sukhadeo Thorat is Professor Emeritus of Economics at Jawaharlal Nehru University, Chair of the Indian Council of Social Sciences Research, and co-founder of the Indian Institute for Dalit Studies. He's a former chair of the University Grants Commission for all of India's universities. Professor Thorat has received numerous awards, including the Padma Shri Award, the Mother Teresa International Award, the Dr. Ambedkar Chetna Award, the Bharat Shiromani Award, and the Purushottam Award. Professor Thorat has published over 20 books and more than 100 papers focused on problems of excluded groups, social inclusive growth, poverty, caste, economic discrimination, and of course the economic ideas of Dr. Ambedkar. Professor Thorat, on a personal note, struggled to get entry into village temples as well in the early 1960s. He rose from a situation of poverty, discrimination, and miseries in a small village and used his writings and social actions for the last 40 years to achieve positive change for deprived peoples in Indian society. So please welcome our distinguished guests. Okay, so for today's agenda, just by way of opening remarks for the format, what I'd like to do is pose 3 individual questions to the panelists, give them space to maybe communicate and exchange ideas amongst themselves. For the individual response, I'd like to have each panelist maybe respond for 5 to 7 minutes, and then we can make room between questions if you want to respond to each other. So without further ado, we'll begin our conversation. So my first question is on early beginnings. We have a lifetime of achievement and experience on this stage, and I think for some of our younger members in the audience, we like to go back in time and rediscover those roots and early beginnings. I'd like to ask Dr. West, please take us back to your early days and tell us about the seminal events that took place in your life that catalyzed your epic thinking on racial injustice.
Thank you very much for that question. Let me just first, on a personal note, just acknowledge the leadership that facilitated our coming together. I'm thinking about my dear brother Larry Simon, visionary work, captain of the ship, my dear brother Lisa Lynch, the provost. And I should say, returning to Brandeis for me, Brandeis has been a place consecrated by towering figures like Herbert Marcuse, Irving Howe, and Michael Walzer. They mean very much to me in my intellectual formation. And of course, Angela Davis as an undergrad, my gosh, she's been so crucial in terms of my own understanding of how we try to relate theory and practice. And there was a professor named Carlos Broussard who taught here at Brandeis in the 70s. And every Friday night we would meet here at Brandeis for the Black Intellectual Reading Group. And that went on for 1 year. So when my wife dropped me off to Brandeis today, all of those precious memories are flooding through my heart, mind, and soul. And for me, it's appropriate, really, to be here to talk about the connection between the legacy of the great Ambedkar. Ambedkar needs to be a household name known in this country. When we think about Gandhi, we ought to think about Ambedkar. And this is very important. This is crucial. It's crucial. My dear sister Tina Marie came to New York City, and Brother Siraj was meeting me in Cambridge. That was one of the things we devoted ourselves to. How do we keep alive the legacy of the best of the towering figures like Ambedkar and Du Bois, who had correspondence with each other, who did write letters to each other? How do we relate the legacy of the Martin Luther King Jr. and Fannie Lou Hamer with Ambedkar? How do we talk about Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel in the same way, given his towering prophetic status, as someone like an Ambedkar? And that's in part, I think, in the name of this conference. In terms of my early years, I'm just my mama's child, my daddy's kid. So really, I am who I am because somebody loved me. And I tend to stay on the love train until the worms get my body. And for me, it's a matter of just moral consistency, most importantly, spiritual integrity, trying to bear witness to a truth even into its innermost parts. And the condition of truth is always to allow suffering to speak. No matter what color, no matter what gender, no matter what sexual orientation, no matter what national identity, human beings wrestling with forms of suffering and misery that are changeable, and how we, through whatever form of weaponry, spiritual weaponry, we've got a magnificent bishop in the house, Bishop Singh. Professor Singh, Professor Thorat, the husband of Professor Singh. Spiritual weaponry, intellectual weaponry, these two distinguished professors. Moral weaponry, any form of weaponry to try to cast a spotlight on the suffering, and especially of precious Dalit brothers and sisters whose suffering has been invisible for far, far, far too long. When I was 14 years old, Brother Martin Luther King was shot. I was a track star. I had to give it up. And I said, I want to try to keep his legacy alive to the best of my fallible and finite ability. And at 63, I'm still trying to hang on to keep that legacy alive. Now, unfortunately, my dear brother Martin had blind spots. He didn't highlight the Dalits, struggled the way in which he ought. When he went to India, he met primarily with our Brahmin brothers and sisters. We love the Brahmin brothers and sisters. I hate Brahmin supremacy, just like I hate white supremacy. I hate Gentile supremacy. I hate any form of ideology that loses. I hate male supremacy that loses sight of the humanity of the person. So even the great Martin Luther King Jr., as much as we love him, as much as he loved us, he can stand corrected as we build in the 21st century on what it is to take seriously the legacy of Van Becker.
Thank you so much, Dr. West. I knew we'd be off to an inspiring start, so thank you. Dr. Singh, similarly, what events in your life's journey has led you to explore the intersection of gender inequality and caste in the South Asian communities that you've worked?
Thank you again for the organizers of this conference, and I also want to extend my thanks to Dr. Thorat and Dr. West for being incarnational representations of bringing together theory and activism. I want to call it intercaste marriage. Theory and activism, mind and heart, teaching and social change. And I think you've shown how scholarship needs to be moving and doing and not a sedentary activity. So thank you for embodying that. So I was 26 when I actually found out I had Dalit roots. So, and I'm going to come back to that later. I was born in Vellore, South India, in the Christian Medical College Hospital. How many of you are familiar with that hospital? Yes, right? Ida Scudder. So that's where I was born. My father was teaching in the Woodies College there. He was a Tamil literature scholar, and one of our friends I met here today is interested in Dalit Tamil literature, so I was so happy to talk to him in Tamil. So anyway, so that's where I was born. And then when I was 3, we moved to the Madras Christian College campus near Chennai, Tamil Nadu, where my father continued to teach Tamil literature. And it's a very gated, protected, elite community, so to speak. So that's where I grew up with no knowledge about the caste reality in India. Never had the opportunity even to hear the word untouchable or Dalit in my life. And that is really appalling and scary to think that I could live 26 of my years of my life being blind to the caste reality in India, and that can happen. So I'm just so ashamed of that, actually. But there are reasons for that, right? So I came here in the year 1990 to the United States in Richmond, of all places, Richmond, Virginia. Very conservative, right? But I was studying a program, Masters in Christian Education, and during my summer vacation, I went to India and met my wonderful husband, Prince, who is my first teacher and my guru when it comes to social justice related to caste discrimination. So I'm really grateful to him for that. So when we married and we moved to, here I am, grew up in this gated community, and all of that among professors and all of that. And then I came to the US, moved to this very rural village in India. It is called Karunguri. I think Gideon Anna knows that place as well. It's a part of the Diocese of the Church of South India in Chennai in India. And my husband was a priest with the Church of South India. So we moved into this 100-year-old beautiful courtyard house, but just totally dilapidating, with all kinds of scorpions and snakes and everything living inside our house. But it was a very interesting but life-changing year for me, because that was the first time I was exposed to face-to-face, on a day-to-day basis, really seeing how Dalit communities were treated like slaves by my own society. And I get very emotional and passionate when I talk about that. So it was very shocking for me. It was a shocking realization. So for me, looking at the way Dalit people have adapted the name Dalit as opposed to untouchable, meaning broken people, right? So that really hit home very clear to me as we saw how our own congregation communities, because we had 17 congregations at that point, we would get into my husband's little Vespa and drive through, rough terrains to reach 17 different congregations. If it was Wednesday, if my husband showed up, that was Sunday in the village, right? And we've had services, communion services in stables and under trees. So just pure organic spirituality is what we really enjoyed and experienced with the simple faith, but ardent faith of Dalit communities. And I'm going to talk later on probably about the role of Christianity in the life of my ancestors and Dalits as well. So the doorbell, right, our doorbell constantly, unceasingly was ringing because people were coming in with a lot of problems, and they really looked to my husband and to me as their counsel and as their guidance, as their confidant. So people came with stories about, my son died due to snake bite, and my landlord is not really bothered about that at all, right? The safety issue. My arm broke, my leg broke, and there is no way for me to go to the hospital. And again, my landlord doesn't care. And rape of young girls attempting suicide because of being shamed. All kinds of problems were really brought to our notice at that point. And again, as a city girl who had just been to America and back, that was like really quite an eye-opener for me as to being exposed, immersed in the struggles of the Dalit community. And I looked at the ambiguity and the absurdity of Dalit life as well. Looking at rape itself as a culturally accepted norm, where, again, that whole absurdity about, well, when does this untouchable woman become touchable? So what makes it all right, right? So it was almost as if, the upper caste male held on to the entitlement of being the caste male, so therefore being pure as opposed to the dirty bodies of the Dalit. So therefore it is not rape, it's not even violence against anything, it's sort of punishment, it's kind of like disciplining, So we use the term corrective rape, which happens to lesbian communities in different parts of the world. And I think even in our own history, in the Christian colonial imagination, how the native bodies were looked at as dirty and polluted. So carrying the sin of sexual sin, right, polluted the sexual sin. So all those layers really sort of, started unraveling right in front of my eyes to see what makes these women dispensable. And that's what really got me into deeper dialogues and deeper relationship with Dalit communities in the Chengalpet district of Tamil Nadu, with whom I still carry on my relationships with them with periodical visits and so on. So they were my first teachers, and that is where I started gaining my own sense of identity of who I am through the lived experiences, and lived experiences matter. Doesn't matter how many books we read, but when you're really there amongst the lived experiences and the struggles of people, that's what really molds me and continues to shape me as I continue to think and write about the intersectionality of caste, gender, religion, language. All kinds of layers were unraveled before me, because it wasn't just the upper caste male and the Dalit woman anymore, right? So there were a lot of layers there, including language, and even among Dalits, the hierarchy of Pallar and the Pariyar communities, and language and religion affiliations and so on. So Christian Dalits gained, sort of a superior attitude over Hindu Dalits and all that aspect. But anyway, I'll come back to that later, because that was my early exposure to really trying to decipher and dismantle and to understand the intersectionalities, the complex layers of intersectionalities among Dalit communities, and I'm grateful for that. And that community actually helped me understand my own Dalit roots when a very older gentleman started talking to me, and he said, "Oh, I know your grandfather, he visited me," and that's when I started putting two and two together. And I had not realized it until that point. But my husband, apparently, he was working there already before he married me. So when people heard he was marrying me, they were like, "Oh, she comes from this family, Dalit family." He knew about my Dalit identity before I did. So when he came home, and I was like really sobbing on the cot, and he was like, "What happened?" And I said, "Well, Mr. Munusamy told me that he knew my grandfather, so apparently I think I am Dalit." And he said, "You didn't know?" I mean, so that was a precious moment. That was really a precious moment, and he really helped me to see the value in being a Dalit woman, and has encouraged me all my life to embrace my Dalit identity. So that was my early story.
Thank you, Dr. Singh. We had the good fortune 3 years ago at Brandeis University to award the Gittler Prize, which is a lifetime achievement in racial, religious, and ethnic relations, to Father Gustavo Gutierrez, who is one of the founding figures of liberation theology in Latin America. And he told us that there is a spirituality in the anguish of the oppressed and the poor. And I see that resonation in your personal narratives, that it's incumbent upon us that fight against oppression to at least see, as you said, Dr. West, the humanity, or the baptism by fire, is that in suffering is the awakening of our humanity, regardless of the religious background we come from. And the question for our cast and the theme is going to be, how do we think about this promising religion and stare at the human rights violations framework that many people see in the caste system? And in that in mind, I want to introduce Dr. Thorat. How did you begin your trajectory, spending decades of your life, both as an academic researcher and in terms of forming the university frameworks, to take on questions of social justice, social discrimination, inequality, especially from an economist perspective, on the class question itself? So please tell me about the early beginnings that got you to your current position.
Thank you very much. Very difficult question, taking back to the, is it working? Taking back to the early formative stages is very difficult, but nevertheless, one can reflect and see the formation of what I am today. But before I do that, let me make 2 points that we must really thank Lawrence Simons and Rajesh Sampath, who made this all possible 3 times in a row. I do remember I spent about 3 months here as a visiting faculty, and we conceived this conference, and Larry was very keen. He respects theories, but he's a man of action, and he's an unfinished legacy of Dr. Ambedkar. We have to finish, that is still there. And I think about a year and a half, when there were demonstrations in front of White House, I saw a very fiery professor speaking about Dalit, and that was Professor West. I had no idea that I will sit in his company, but thank you very much. Yeah. Well, going back to the early formation of, it's very difficult, but let me share with you honestly how it began and what made me what I am today. I think possibly the motivation was the place where I stay in village. There are a lot many people from Maharashtra, and they know what I will share with you, that I was grown up in a village where inequality is so visible. We have a separate settlement of scheduled caste, a little away from the high caste. As soon as you became a child, you know your physical mobility, you are told limit of your mobility, that's your locality, this is high caste locality, you can't move. And then you began to think what you are in terms of your identity. You don't have access to village temple, you don't have access to commonwealth, you have restricted access to the public road, and no question of having a social relation, eating and sitting together with high caste. This is the milieu in which every child in Maharashtra grew. But in my case, of course, rampant poverty in the house. Normally, 80% of the Dalits are landless laborers, work in the field of high caste. Same was the story with me. But somehow it was a period marked by an anti-caste movement in our village as a part of the extended movement of Dr. Ambedkar in the around 1958 and 56. I must tell with you that because of Dr. Ambedkar's being in the Constitution Assembly and chairman of the drafting committee, he introduced the provision banning untouchability in the Constitution itself, in the section on fundamental right, and passed an Untouchability Offence Act. That is, there are public sphere where if you don't allow the untouchable to have access, the action will be punishable. And I do remember we did not have access to the village temple and the village well in the village. And one of our celebrated leader, he is no more, R.S. Gavi, he came with 2 police and the copy of the act and show it to the high caste that these wells and the temples are public entities and untouchable should have a right. They came with sticks, opposition, and they warned them, police warned them that, look, you will be arrested immediately. We got the entry finally. I remember as a small child running into the well. It is a well which has a step. Here you have to go down to reach to the water. Now, this is the atmosphere in which I think I grew and saw the immense discrimination, and possibly that has impact when I grew up and took an higher education. But one of the most important things that I would like to share with you is that when I was a 9-year-old child, my father and brother went to Nagpur on 14th of October and converted to Buddhism from Dr. Ambedkar. And he gave them 22 oath that they won't do this, they won't do this, and one of them was that they won't pray Hindu gods and goddess. They came back, and my elder brother, who was little elder to me, he came back, and we had what is called some gods in our house. You know, the Hindu family, every Hindu family has what is called a small temple inside the house. And we had a couple of gods made of copper. This crazy fellow took all gods, my elder brothers, who came from Nagpur after conversion, and converted them into an instrument of play. My mother was so angry with him. She was a traditional lady, and she had not gone to Nagpur, and she didn't understand what conversion to Buddhism means. She didn't give him food almost for 10 days. I had to share my food with him. So this is the milieu in which I grew. Rajesh, if you like to know the early stages. And education, of course, was extremely difficult. Only public institutions had made a beginning. But up to third standard, we were having a classes in a temple. An untouchable student would see separately. They were not allowed to go anywhere near to the god. And later on then, for 7th and 8th standard, I had to walk 6 kilometers every day to go to the school. Every day to 6 kilometers and come back. These are the tough times for this is not my story. This is the story of untouchables in every small villages. But after high school, I entered into a wonderful temple. I went to Dr. Ambedkar college set up by Dr. Ambedkar, Million College of Arts, Aurangabad. 90% of the students are from Dalit background, come with a common conscience, don't feel feeling of discrimination, but they learn about Ambedkar. And whatever I had seen in my village, I could see the meaning of that by reading Ambedkar. The first thing that I read was, I remember, Annihilation of Caste, a very, very famous book of Dr. Ambedkar, but was a part of the social movement. You know, there was a Republican Student Federation, then it was converted into West Dalit Panther. Yeah, and the entire student organization was converted in Dalit Panther in 1971. And I was vice president of that organization, very militant, they borrowed from. These are our old connections on which we have not really built up. We will talk about it later more. But that is how I grew up in Million College. But I was not happy. I had an urge to understand why is it that Dalit do not have a land? Why it is that they are outside the village? Why they do not have access? And why they are treated untouchable, unapproachable, unseeable? You can't see untouchable in the early morning. It is inauspicious to see them. This is the level of deprivation that I had seen in my village, and I wanted to seek an answer. Inequality and discrimination was an issue. So I took a leave without pay. I had a wife. I didn't care where do I get the money from, whether I will send money to my wife. But I went to one of the best universities in the country, Jawaharlal Nehru University, and there I had the basic grounding of empirical analysis, theories. But let me tell you, this journey was most difficult, most lonely, frustrating at times, but exciting and also satisfactory. It was frustrating because as progressive as Jawaharlal Nehru University, there were no courses on caste discrimination, there are no courses on Dalit. When I went for admission to one of the departments, they said, we don't have teacher to teach you. I had given a topic for PhD on untouchability and economics deprivation, something of that sort, because I thought that untouchability and caste is the reason for economic disparity, so I gave that topic. And they said, we don't have this topic and we don't have a teacher. I went to other center. There, they were little more liberal. So I think that bringing of JNU really put me across and made me enable me to really study and take research on discrimination and inequality. But I'll come later that my exposure to the African American scholarship, particularly the economics, has helped me quite a lot in later stage of my life. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Thorat. And anytime my panelists feel so compelled to respond to a question, we can do that. But I'd like to acknowledge a brilliant symposium that was put on by my colleagues 2 weeks ago, I believe. And I can't see because there's a bright light right in my eyes as I'm trying to also focus my panels. But Professor Alia Rahman and Professor Chad Williams put on an excellent symposium 2 weeks ago on Black Lives Matter. And it's, as we climax and culminate this conversation into the comparative dialogue, looking at comparative context, focusing on the single context of racial oppression in America, the agony, the synthesis of agony and hope, this recursive dialectic in American society. When you start with the inhumanity and evil of slavery, to the futility in thinking in separate but equal, and white mob violence against innocent citizens who just gained citizenship, to the promise of the civil rights movement to overcome that legally, but then to inherit after that the legacy of that oppression in a new form, state-condoned violence and the homicide of innocent African-American lives. It's that dialectic of time and history where people, they age in a society and they grow to a point where hope is possible, yet there's also insurmountable struggle. I'd like the next question for all of our panelists, starting with Dr. West, to focus on, if we start with now, where you are today after this very long struggle and history you've been through. Where does the mind, the life of mind, meet the heart, as Dr. Singh said, intercaste marriage? I love that. What do we teach the young people with regard to what happens inside the academy, the sacrosanct space of the academy, and the continuous feeling of social justice and oppression on the outside? Because for people of color in this society, it's a continuum. They can't compartmentalize the private and the public. And the struggle is continuous. So what can you teach them, what can you teach us with regard to your view on the life of mind and the life of the activist?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. The great Oliver Cromwell Cox wrote a book in 1948 called Class, Caste, and Race. And he's a towering sociologist, black sociologist, Marxist sociologist. And he always tried to get us to see the relation between catastrophe in the past, the consequences of a catastrophe in the past, in the present, and ways in which we can conceive of alternative futures in the present. And we live in a very, very, very bleak moment now because we've got ubiquitous commodification, commercialization, marketization, which cuts off access to the past and makes the present just a repetition of instant gratification, obsession with career, opportunity, the move, strategy, and tactics. So issues of integrity, honesty, and decency are pushed aside. And it makes it very hard to conceive of there being an alternative future as opposed to just the future as an extension of the nightmarish present. And this affects all of us, but this is especially so for young people. That's why the movement for Black Lives is so very important, because you actually have a significant number of young people who've been wrestling with the consequences of the catastrophe of white supremacy. 244 years of slavery, 90 years of American terrorism. That's Jim Crow Senior. We still got Jim Crow Junior operating. And Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow is one particular articulation of the ways in which the catastrophe of Jim Crow still manifests in hyper-incarceration regimes and in hoods where, of course, you've got decrepit school systems, inadequate housing, and massive unemployment and underemployment and so forth. But I'm talking about the spiritual and moral dimension of this thing. And here, actually, Abraham Joshua Heschel becomes very important. His first essay that he wrote in English was called Analysis of Piety. And piety is a historical recovery. It's remembrance of the best of your past. It's a reverence for something beyond just the marketplace, or status and careers, your calling and your vocation, not your career and your profession. And then it's resistance. Those are the three pillars, he argued, an analysis of piety. So a lot of people think of piety in regard to religion as blind obedience to dogma. No, that's not it. Uncritical deference to doctrine. No, that's not it. It's the acknowledgement of the sources of good in your life and how you are indebted to them in light of the life you live that can create an alternative present for those who are suffering in the present. And the present, I mean, the major challenge these days, and of course in America, in Trump's America, you've got a neo-fascism in the making. Big money, big banks, big corporations, military-industrial complex in the driver's seat. callousness and indifference toward poor people and working people and vulnerable people. And then the xenophobic appeal in terms of scapegoating the most vulnerable rather than confronting the most powerful Mexicans, Muslims, black folk, Jews, Arabs, and so forth, and others, and women not a minority, that's the vast majority of humankind, actually. But all of those xenophobic appeals, when it comes together, you got a very bleak moment. Now, I know the Hindu nationalist regime in India is a bleak moment, too. And you begin to see some of the parallels. You see, India, American Empire, and black folk in the American Empire, and Dalits in the context of India's right-wing right-wing nationalist project, Hindu nationalist project. And again, you can see just how timely it is that we come together. I mean, it's not just a chit-chat because we like each other, even though I do like my brothers and sisters, but it's a matter of historical imperative given the nuclear catastrophe escalating with Russia, the United States, the ecological catastrophe that we see now with the planet only having 2.5 hours in the symbolic clock that's taking place. And then the corporate greed, and then the white supremacy, the male supremacy, the xenophobic ideologies that are escalating every day. Every day. And how do we confront it in such a way that we're true to the exemplars of integrity and honesty and decency like that Becker and Du Bois and Martin King and so many others that we can invoke.
Thank you, Professor West. I really loved your preface of Black Prophetic Fire. The global magnitude of oppression for different people and the diverse experiences of global oppression is always felt at the local level. Some of us celebrated the beautiful Pesach and Passover recently, and at my particular dinner, the individual mentioned the prayer that Abraham Heschel said at Civil Rights Martin Luther King. Every step was like a prayer. And we reflected on that, and what it means is that there's comparative dialogue to be had now, given the monolithic nature of global oppression, that different traditions have come together to state one simple fact. Our common humanity is the ethical reaction to suffering, which for some peoples goes back centuries. The African American experience alone is 5 centuries. We'll talk about the Dalit experience. And then the Jewish experience from the Exodus. So there are 3 powerful threads that can come together in a conversation to try to tease out the best of each tradition in response to this massive machinery that you're talking about, which is the war machine, and the immorality that surrounds just a blind obedience to global capitalism and states, quite frankly. So with that in mind, Dr. Singh, talk about the relationship between the evolution of your research and your work and the nonprofit organization that you've worked on. Maybe some of the comparative linkages, too, between your experiences with racial oppression and inequality in this country, Black feminist thought and indigenous communities, with the ongoing and powerful research you've done in the South Indian and indigenous communities on gender, Dalit, and intersectional sort of oppression.
Okay, that's a broad, long, intense topic. But thank you, though, for the opportunity. I'll try this cultural conformity, sitting down and talking. So after I came into realization of my Dalit identity and being in the presence of Dalit human rights leaders that my husband introduced me to, opened up different privileges for me to be able to be involved in social activism at the grassroots level. So that's how I started my own involvement. And so we had very small grassroots organizations in Karanguri where we were. The first one that I was exposed to was the Social Action Center, which was again started by one of our former bishops in the Church of South India. Mostly it was actually the front room of our house. The very first room in our house was the Social Action Center. And so where people would come to, because there was no other space for Dalit communities to go to bring their issues, to get any kind of legal support whatsoever. So with a handful of Dalit men and women, that organization was running. I think when we got there, it was probably in its 3rd year of life. And so that is how I got involved, and predominantly we foregrounded the importance of education, first of all, and then the physical protection of bodies of girls. And it just came down to that, that was the immediacy, the urgency of that particular place and the need that people were actually exposing us to. So after working there for about a year and a half, one of the most important stories that I can remember that happened was to a young Christian Dalit girl who was about 16, 15, or maybe younger, I think 15 probably, who was working as a servant maid in an educated Christian Dalit home. So there was a hierarchy there, so another layer of intersection there. So the young Christian boy in that household took sexual advantage of that little girl. And she didn't even know what was happening to her. And her mother was blind and her father was working in the fields. She had just lost her brother to snake bite. I mean, it's just a really sad situation. And that was brought to our notice. And the fact that Prince and I and the other social workers there really wanted to, community organizers, they really wanted to address this issue because now the Christian Dalit family is claiming a superior status. And we were up against a huge, different matrix of domination that we were not used to. It was probably easier to sort of confront domination when it's from an upper caste community and you know exactly what you're doing. But then here it's a different situation. They're all Dalit people, but then because of their wealth and their education, they think we cannot really file a case of rape. So that was quite a challenging situation for us, but we were able to bring some justice to the girl. Then as the story goes, eventually the father of the boy fell sick and he thought it was because of his son's sin, so therefore got them married. The boy and the girl who was taken advantage of. So that's a long story, but those were the kinds of situations that we were dealing with and trying to bring justice to individual stories there. And then from there we came to Morristown, New Jersey, wanting to pursue higher studies, and we were also not encouraged by the leadership, again, another layer, Dalit leadership in the church. Again, once power comes into hand, domination happens, right? It just happens. So my husband was not encouraged to take part in social justice activities. So that was a battle for us. And so we left, we came to study, and again I finished my education at Virginia, and we came to Morristown, New Jersey. My husband started a PhD program at Drew University, Madison. And in Morristown, New Jersey, again, church and different other faith communities were interested in our story, and they wanted to be involved. So we were probably the first group in North America who actually got involved with the National Campaign for Dalit Human Rights. They had a signature campaign, an international signature campaign. And it was really a moving experience to work with young white and black children in our youth group in the church who would be out on the streets soliciting signatures, telling people about the caste reality in India. Could you please sign this? Could you please sign this? And that was when the momentum actually started building around an anti-caste movement here in New Jersey. And one of our foremost pioneers in motivating us towards that is here. I'm just so honored, Dr. Jebaroja. I'm just so grateful to him. Is that Joel there? Oh my goodness. Joel was one of our youth there in Morristown who did the signature campaign, and he's still involved with Dalit communities in India. Joel, just raise your hand. He's an amazing individual, and he actually published the book Dalit Women Speak Out, which is about the narratives, really the testimonials of Dalit women, which has never been captured and presented in the court. So thank you for your work, Joe. So I'm so thrilled that you're here. So that's how the momentum started building, and we were able to really make a lot of things happen in the communities that we had left in India through that. And I also started gaining my own inspiration from other Dalit leader activists in India itself, people like Ruth Manorama, Bama, who's one of my heroes, Tamil Dalit woman writer, Rani Periyasamy, Kalaimakar. These are all grassroots leaders as well. So working with them, building relationships was very important to me. So without relationships, it's nothing. So they continue to mold me. So it's a coming together. I see activism as a coming together of the heart, the head, the heart, and the hand, right? So which Kurt can really point to as theory, vision, and change. And I think Dr. Thorat mentioned the urge to do something, right? The urge to really change the situation. And another word for that would be the desire. And I think I drew a lot of strength from seeing that desire in Dalit women. You know, that itself was agency for me. And I saw in them a change-seeking restlessness. And I think that's the situation that we all need to be in, I think, because if we are comfortable where we are, it's not good. We have to be restless, and that's what I see in these women. There is a continuous, constant change-seeking restlessness. And that's where I draw my own understanding of what social activism and feminism actually should be. And I mean, there are so many different explanations and theories on feminism, multiracial feminisms, post-colonial feminism, which I'm really still wondering what that is about. How somebody can actually claim the status of the colonized, being a part of, the matrix of dominance in India, and then they come here and act as super scholars who are marginalized in American academia. So that's an interesting phenomenon in itself. But however, I really, for the moment, I'm resting on the lap of transnational indigenous feminism, which for me really breaks open the value of desire and actions. Not just as texts of agency, but really, where action really happens in that desire, and that helps me to detangle representation from alleged identities to testimonies of lived experiences, and that's what people like Joel have really helped to happen. And then seeing purposeful agency from being different, so that's something I see in Dalit women, and I totally admire that the way they actually use innovative, creative strategies to subvert the very difference that they're stigmatized for as tools of action. And that just totally blows me, and I'm enamored by how they're able to do that, really subverting that whole idea of difference. And I think you were a student of Derrida, and he would probably agree, on looking at indigenous women's leadership through that lens, basically. Because when you look at it as being subversive strategies that are intentional, they also come out as surprising everybody else, So they're out there. Suddenly, Dalit women are showing up with lathis and sickle and machetes, and raiding liquor stalls and raiding places of forbidden places like temples and police stations, and wherever they see that they need to demand a right so that their lives could be better, that they can have a better quality of life. So therefore, let's target liquor, let's target equal wages and so on. So that really shapes my own understanding and my reverence and respect for Dalit women activists. So that's the intersection that we actually see, where speech, thought, action, what we see, what we experience, what we witness, what we do, all are on that same plane of intersection, I think. And when we begin to see the nodes of intersection as providing opportunities for linkages, fertile linkages that can be fertile spaces where new meanings can actually be drawn in understanding what social change is all about. So it moves from individual consciousness to collective action, and then targeting and naming what actually needs to be done. And I call it as performative intersectionality, because you're able to name it, and then you really sort of chip out the cultural inlays, and you want to make your change as permanent as the originators of the caste system wanted caste to be permanent. And so you want your change to be sustainable. It's a challenge, right, to really go against that kind of permanency, but then you do it. So you surprise the unsurprising sort of forces, because if you look at the dominant powers and forces, whether it's coming from upper caste communities or wherever, with race or caste, it's very predictable. It's predictable that you will be punished for transgressing, like Dr. Thorat experienced. So punishment for transgression is the cultural norm, right? So there's nothing surprising about it. So such an unsurprising kind of phenomenon, Dalit women sort of thwarted with surprising through their strategies. And that just really blows my mind off, and I get super excited about that. So I think that's where it comes from.
Thank you so much, Dr. Singh. I so look forward to engaging you on the third question and throughout the conference on the comparative context. Dr. West had mentioned the work of Angela Davis and Patricia Combs, for example, on intersectionality, that these are the first voices arguing. That if you think about the intersectional nature of oppression, the layers of oppression, Davis pointed to the fact that when patriarchy, capitalism, and racism are all colluding against you, that's something that any other group, the white male, female, and black male, may not be able to see that type of vortex. Trying to look at those experiences and then take that in comparison to indigeneity and the Dalit liberation struggle. Feminist liberation theologies from an indigenous perspective that can challenge the patriarchal norms inside a lot of the religious systems, including our Western and our Judeo-Christian roots. So there's so much work to be done at not just intersection within a single culture, but across the cultures when we look at gender equality and liberation within religious systems. So Dr. Thorat, can you tell us about the evolution of the academic research, the critical acclaim that you received as an economist within the Indian context, and then the global audience you've built and the partners you've created around the world to extend the economic research to the activist realm? And I think a good example is the birth of the Indian Institute for Dalit Studies and the centers of governance that you've built all throughout India, and all these amazing conferences that you've launched, comparative dialogues that you've launched with many prestigious American universities on the caste question. So where does the academic research meet the current social movements and anti-caste activities in India and in the diaspora?
Well, to go back to the research on the problem of untouchable, ex-untouchable, and its relation with activism, I think it's a very important issue. If you go back to the scholarship, especially the scholarship on Dalit and Dr. Ambedkar, in the 70s and the 60s, we did not have scholars who come out of the university and colleges and join the academic and write about their life and their movement. We hardly had. It is the rise of Dalit academia, a serious Dalit academia, is a phenomenon of, I would say, 80s and the 90s. But the early writing came from those people who got educated in the colleges and the universities and entered into bureaucracy. And because they had a struggle before them, most of them come from a very poor background and they got BA, MA, and other degrees. And they had to take a job. But in their consciousness, because of the Dr. Ambedkar movement and their awareness of what was in their villages, made them to write. And therefore, the early writing about Dr. Ambedkar and about Dalit is by the Dalit administrators. And a large number of books you will find that the administrators and those who are joined government service, that they have taken a role of an academician. And you find quite a large number of literature coming up. And at the same time, I must confess and say that the university system in India and the colleges, particularly university system, did not have positive steps towards undertaking research on the problem of caste and untouchability. There is a general bypass and general ignorance and deliberate perhaps not to undertake research on this issue. But Dalit administrator brought out a lot of things. I would not like to name them, there are many of them, and everywhere it happens. But the rise of Dalit academia in the 80s and the 90s, I think they made a very, very significant impact. Not only that they produce huge literature on many aspects, but they develop their approaches, theoretical approaches. I can give only two examples. Dalit literature, for example. Dalit literature has become a world phenomenon now. And the theories, the form in which they wrote was completely different than the traditional literature, and they have broken several grounds. we see a lot of linkages with black literature at that time. There were people writing about and making comparison of black literature. That is the word that they use, not the African American literature at that time. And so in 70s and 80s, there is literature came in a big way. But university academicians in the 90s and 2000, they made certainly an impact on many of the issues which were not undertaken by the university system. Unfortunately, institutionalization of research on the studies on Dalit is nearly absent in India. Some beginning has been made. We do not have African American Center in each of the university that you have here. The only, we get isolated centers set up by the state. We have a professor here from Nagpur University who is occupying the chair in the Ambedkar centers. And you get a couple of them in some state, but beyond that, beside that, you don't find any organizer taken on the part of the state to set up centers to undertake the studies of the problem of the Dalit. And neither do the mainstream social scientists undertake research. So there is a gap which is being covered now to a certain extent. And as a result, the scholarship is very limited compared to the African American scholarship. My God, if I start comparing, each university has African American Center, in early mid-60s and 70s have been set up. Then you have chairs, you have associations for sociology, economics, philosophy, and there are conferences. Each of the general conferences, for example, American Economic Association will have an annual session on the problem of African Americans. So much presence of African American academic in the mainstream literature. Besides that, they have their own literature. But that is not the case with India. We don't have an association of academics, except the literary association. So there we are really lacking behind. But when I was the chairman of the University Grant Commission, I took certain steps. University Grant Commission is a huge organization. I did not know that the chairman had such a power. So I set up 32 centers. They are called Center for Social Exclusion and Inclusive Policies, mainly specialized studies on caste, tribal and minority question. But they have been under-financed by the institution after I left. They have a lot of difficulty in growing. There is no positive attitude on the part of the center. Forget of creating a center like African American Studies. But those who have been created by me, they are being under-financed and allowed to die very natural death. It is in this context, I took the initiative, not me. It's the civil society players who took the initiative, and we set up what is called Indian Institute of Dalit Study, which has become the premier institute in the country, which undertakes research and other things. But it has a background. Give me 1 minute. There was a Durban conference, United Nations conference on xenophobia and racism and other. And the Dalit wanted to make the issues of caste felt in the United Nations. They say that if you include race and color, why not caste? Caste is race in terms of its consequences. Both are discriminatory in nature, but the source is different. One is perhaps race, theoretical construct, other is also a theoretical construct. But the government opposed. And high caste academia opposed. And there was a huge debate. And after the conference, in fact, I bought a book. All articles for and against were brought together, and we brought out a book, Caste, Discrimination and Race in International Context. And that time, the NGO and a funding agency like Ford and others felt that how understaffed and how the scholarship among Dalit is weak, that they even cannot defend adequately enough in the UNO. And therefore, I think Ford Foundation took an initiative and gave a grant, and 2 institutions were created. And IRDS was one of them. I was told that if I go as a director, they will set up in Delhi, otherwise it goes to some other place outside Delhi. I took a leave for 5 years. I had several offers of becoming a vice chancellor. I did not accept because I thought my major work of Dalit activism would suffer. But I took a directorship of this institute. There was no land, there was nothing. My colleagues in the center were laughing at me. What is he doing? But I went there in 2003 and set up, and now it is a premier institute, but not without support, not with full support from the government. Still, there is no support, there is no encouragement. It is the funding agency and others that helps. So, but that is how the status of academic research as far as Dalit is concerned. And And there are innumerable areas where we don't have information. When I look at the African American literature, it is way, way ahead of us. You take any topic and you have literature available. Large number of journal articles, books are published here. Now, as far as the academic activism is concerned, I think the academic activism that is going beyond academic and doing for something for policy, for society, and for helping leaders and others is invariably there everywhere. Any Dalit bureaucrats or an academician have a desire to be practical, to do something about it. You can find here a whole team of university. Mr. Mishram is a registrar and there are teachers. They have no academic engagement, but they go beyond their administrative responsibility and try to do something about it. I think the awareness and consciousness that Dr. Ambedkar has created compel or incentivize people to undertake activity wherever they go. I think that is what Ambedkar movement will survive. People comes to USA, go elsewhere, and there they create organization. You have Ambedkar International Mission, Raju Kamble is sitting here. They built up that organization in 10, 15 countries. He drive them wherever they go. They sacrifice part of their income. I think activism emanating from consciousness and study is the key feature of Ambedkarite movement. And I think that's a very important aspect of it. But let me share with you that academic is not moving as fast as we should because of lack of support, financial support on the part of the government. On the contrary, there is a discouragement that we should not reveal dirt of our society, caste discrimination, poverty, inequality, atrocity, violence, and its connection with religion. So all these people do not want to bring out as much as very few want, but others do not. So it is a hard struggle for the academic. But activism and that consciousness is the only one which keeps us surviving and going.
Thank you so much, Dr. Thorat. Just to check on time, we are at 4:30 now, so what we can do is maybe a quick response to our culminating question, but then we can share with the audience. We can continue that dialogue with the audience. And then I don't see Professor Simon because I don't know what the transition is from 5 o'clock to the next point, but I'm sure we'll find it out. You know, Dr. West, in our context in the United States, all 4 of us on the stage are people of color. 3 of us have faced caste oppression. I want us to think about the public intellectual. You know, you talked about the moral and spiritual integrity of those of us that have been given the gift, as you said, to be trained as academicians. We have the special burden of the public intellectual, and you're one of America's most preeminent, that white privilege allows perhaps the white majority, not single individuals, to be free from racial oppression, obviously. And those of us that live in the humanities and the social sciences, you know, our job is not just to come to work and disseminate knowledge. Having been the victims of oppression and having the ethical and social responsibility to take what we know on the inside and to engage in that continuous battle. Where do the sources of energy come from for the public intellectual? And now we have this tremendous opportunity to engage in a global network of solidarity to find out what other forms of public intellectual life look like. Because the struggle, as you said, is global and local. It has to be interrelated, and we have to share across cultural contexts. Tell us what your vision is for the public intellectual, and what does that mean for all movements that are trying to fight oppression?
I'll be very brief because I'm going to open it up for questions and voices, but no, I think the calling of the intellectual who finds herself or himself in a public context, a set of contexts, is just to tell the truth and deal with the consequences. Anytime you tell the truth in the face of status quo who are trying to hide and conceal various forms of domination, various forms of suffering, and you speak the truth to those sufferings, you're going to find yourself pushed against the wall. And that's what Malcolm X was dealing with, that's what Du Bois was dealing with, Noam Chomsky deals with, Edward Said was dealing with, that's what Heschel was dealing with, Susan Sontag, the whole slew of intellectuals who mustered the courage to try to speak truths that were highly unpopular and force them to be nonconformists, vis-a-vis the status quo with all of its various goodies. So you have to be willing to tell the truth and lose some popularity. You got to be willing to tell the truth and lose certain corporate sponsorships sometimes. And that can go too far, and you end up broke with the Ten Commandments financially. But that's really what it's all about. And there's no magic to it. It's just a matter of whether you're willing to deal with character assassination or literal assassination or professional assassination, if you're raising certain truths outside of the orthodoxy of your discipline, outside of the various dogmas of your guild. And that's what Amos was about. That's what Isaiah was about. That's what Esther was about.
Thank you so much, Professor West. Professor Singh, in a similar vein, whether it's the Indian context, the American context, where do we muster the sources of courage as public intellectuals working in community and in social transformation? What drives us and what sustains us? And how can we speak across contexts?
Thank you, Dr. West, for those comments, and Dr. Thorat also. You're mentioning, Dr. Thorat, about the lack of support and encouragement in India to Dalit scholarship. It's not very different in the US as well. Because those of us who are in caste studies and we're trying to really publish here, we know how that goes. I mean, I have published in journals and chapter books and so on, and people are, putting an edited volume together. Suddenly they have to thought, oh, we need an essay on Dalit women, so let's call Roja. So, but then, I have tried very hard for many, many years to get my book proposal accepted in various presses in the US, and it's been very, very difficult. So thank God, finally somebody connected the mind and the soul. And so my book is going to come out in August. I'm super thrilled. It's the first of the series called Spotted Goddesses. And so this one is about grassroots leadership strategies of Dalit women. And I do sort of prelude it with a little bit of my own understanding, coming to my own understanding of my identity in the villages in India. So academia is always a struggle. And I think of all the spaces that I'm in my day-to-day life, it's in academia, in college, is where I actually see hierarchy still going on, So it's an ongoing battle, it's an ongoing struggle, and I'm sure it is more difficult in India, definitely, because it is so imminent, right, for you. So in any way that we can be supportive, now that you've befriended Dr. West, you can make things happen, I'm sure, for the Dalit Study Center. And that's what really makes you such an inspiration for us, Dr. Thorat, like really working with little to no resources. So thank you for making that happen. And I have piggybacked on Black feminist thought, and also I'm big into really embracing indigenous thoughts. So I study and I teach indigenous communities of women. I do a comparative course on Native American women, Australian Aboriginal women, Dalit women in India. And I draw a lot of my understanding of what feminist analysis or feminism actually should be. So the common ground that I actually found was, I don't know how many of you have known the group Sweet Honey in the Rock. I'm sure you're familiar with that, doctors. And I just used to get so pumped with listening to them because they're an a cappella black feminist group. And Bernice Reagan sings this, "We are the ones we've been waiting for." And for me, that just totally encapsulates anything, any kind of rhetoric on feminism or activism. So that's what indigenous activism is about. And it is about not waiting for somebody else, but we are the ones we've been waiting for. So just get going, sisters. Let's get the change happen here, right? So let's not wait. So that spontaneity, I think, is really something that I draw from other feminist practices and Black feminist thought, especially with Patricia Hill Collins, when she talks about coming into a self-knowledge and how that self-knowledge can make social change happen. And I recently watched this movie, Loving. I don't know how many of you have seen that. Isn't it a powerful movie? Talks about interracial marriage, and then I started reading about the real story behind it. So you have this young, shy, country girl who's married to this white guy, but then it's a crime in Virginia. So she's thrown in jail, he goes free. But then they're not allowed to like come back to the state of Virginia for 25 years. I mean, that's an outcast situation, like an interracial marriage situation, an intercaste marriage situation in India, I think. But in that case, again, you see how that amount of self-knowledge and self-consciousness, she's able to actually change the Virginia state law. So those are examples that continue to, real examples that continue to, I think, challenge what theoretical analysis actually should be. It comes down to really valuing, like you're saying, the truth-telling. Testimonial narratives are a huge part of indigenous communities, and those are the truth-telling narratives that are challenging whatever has been their history that was presented by other voices, right? So that's what Dalit women today, and Dalit men and women are actually doing today, is to really challenge those imposed discourses and make their own narratives matter, right? So their voices should matter. So no longer, we don't want to be marginalized anymore as the subaltern, right? We have our voices, and I think the multi-million-dollar question that everybody points to speak is Spivak, right? Can the subaltern speak? But we want to move away from that and say, that's not a question anymore. Seriously, is that, right? So that kind of scholarship, marrying that scholarship and real life activism is what I see in indigenous communities and Black feminist thought. And so that's where I continued my scholarship.
Thank you so much, Dr. Singh. Very provocative. There's so much we're going to explore in the conference on those themes. So the final question to Dr. Thorat, again, the role of the public intellectual across cultural contexts, the global moment, shared practices. What can we, as we open up the questions to the audience for the last portion, what do you envision as the role of the public intellectual in the Dalit context in India, the diaspora, and your engagement with African American economists and intellectuals here in the United States?
Well, this is a very important question. I will be brief. I think we are running out of time frames. The first thing is that I want to say that there is a huge similarities between the problem of African American and Dalit. You examine any aspect and you find a very close similarity. Both suffered from discrimination and denial of right to property, denial of right to civic right, denial of right to religion in a different sense of the term, political right. Exactly the same thing happened with the Dalit. They did not have a right to property, they did not have a right to education, cultural, social rights. In both countries, legal methods are used. The legal protection is provided in case of violation. We have Anti-Disability Act of 1955 and Atrocity Act of 1989. In both cases, the violation of right is subject to punishment. So we have used the legal method. You have used a voluntary action policy, we have used reservation. That is to give a share in public employment, in enterprises, in education institutions, and many other spheres in policy making, informal policy. But the problem persists of inequality and discrimination, and we do have the same thing. We will have a lot of statistic and other information coming up in the technical session. So there is a huge similarity, and the responses are similar. The Dalits have thrown up a lot of scholarship, trying to study, so do the African American scholarship. And you have created several centers, we are creating centers. My God, there is so much of similarity to cooperate and to come together. But the saddest part of this is that I see extremely big links between the African American academician, African American civil rights movement, African American political leaders coming together, learning from each other, the Black caucus, and there is hardly any Dalit caucus coming together and learning. So I think if there is a message of this discussion, I will submit Professor West and others that how do we take a step ahead and come together to understand each other's problem and help us to build up the policies. You have rightly said that Martin Luther came in Bombay in the very early 60s, and he just met a couple of people and then straight we went to Delhi because he was influenced by Gandhiji, non-violence movement and all that. But that in the city of Bombay, which is the birthplace and a very vibrant place of anti-caste movement, he couldn't meet a single leader simply because he was not aware at all. So I think we have to rebuild the relation because the similarity of the problem. I on my own, I have tried quite hard in the academic. When I came to USA, I taught here for 3 years and I was keen to develop the relation. I had a tough time, but I did that. In academic, I moved out from Iowa State University to Washington, D.C., and one of my economist friend, I asked, give me the name of an African American economist. I would like to learn economics of discrimination and many other things. And he gave me the name of William Darity, a fantastic economist, yeah. And he responded to my email, and then the relationship built up. I learned quite a lot on theories. I learned quite a lot from on empirical study, his book Persisting Inequality with Samuel Mine, and then the entire gate opened for me. And then I was crazy. In fact, the International Food Policy Research Institute, where I used to work, after 12 o'clock in the night up to 2:30, 3 o'clock, I pick up the issue of economic judgment and go into the special session of African American study and make the photocopies, right up to 3 o'clock. Then I came across that William Darity published that magnanimous big volume, Economics and Caste, 2 volume, $500. So I went to Georgetown University, located that volume, and along with one girl, photocopy the entire volume. It took about 2 months, every day at 2 o'clock. So I was attracted and fascinated by the scholarship, and it is that scholarship, Rajesh, that helped me to develop methodology of studying caste discrimination, economic discrimination. As a matter of fact, we did not know how to define caste, economic discrimination. What statistical method should be used? What theory should be used? We have fantastic theory. Becker, Yarrow, Akerlof, and Darity, and that gives insight to you. Then I was in Iowa. I met Gary Thorat, a person who was studying temple art, and we converted him to a Dalit art. He brought out a wonderful book, Dalit Art and Imagery by Oxford. Now that book has become a textbook for India. Thank you, Gary. It's a wonderful contribution, but there are others. So I think we have a lot of bridges to be built, and we benefit more out of it. Possibly you will benefit more out of it. William Darity wrote a foreword to my book, Economic Discrimination in Modern India, Block by Caste, and he mentioned his personal experience that, I had a sort of Skype on him for a general public. And he was asked that, can you share American experience with the Indian affirmative reservation policy, some better point of American policy. And he opened up with a statement that let me make very clearly that we have a lot to learn from India, not USA has to learn, India has to learn from USA with respect to affirmative action policy. Indian reservation policy is far ahead of what you have in USA. But we try to develop contact. Shahbaz is sitting here, we signed an MOA, and we are going to have maybe next conference of this unfinished legacy, he might take over, Gary might take over. And then there are many others, the fantastic group, this Bhagat, the Boston group, Kamble and others. Sunil is a fantastic guy, you can't imagine. He writes regularly, he's involved. So I think we have a lot of resource, a lot of commitment to build on. And we can build upon that. So we can compensate the loss that we had in 60s and 70s. Thank you.
And Dr. West, take us to the next frontier. What does a world of racial equality and anti-oppression look like?
I don't know if I can take you there, though, brother. But I can just say I'm glad to be here. This is a magnificent conversation for me. The end of the aim is to put the international, national, regional, local spotlight on dollar doings and sufferings. That's #1 agenda. Now, I come from a people now who have forced people to do that because of the ways in which, in the face of terror and trauma and stigma, we were able to come up with such magnificent visions of freedom. And in the face of being so hated, we taught the world so much of how to love. And it was in the artistic and the cultural spheres, as well as the spiritual and moral spheres. So John Coltrane's Love Supreme, Marvin Gaye's What's Going On, Lorraine Hansberry, Raising in the Sun, Mama on the Stage, never been a character exemplifying that much love on the American stage to this day. Toni Morrison's Beloved, James Baldwin's love-soaked essays. We can go on and on and on. What black people did was let the world know in the face of all of this hatred and contempt, there's a love of truth and beauty and goodness and the holy that you have to take measure. Now, granted, we did that in the belly of the beast. We did it in the American Empire. so we could send off Louis Armstrong with the State Department. So they think that somehow he's an ambassador for the American dream, but he's hitting the high C on West End blues. That's a critique of the American dream. See what I mean? So that in that sense, there's a difference because our precious Dalit brothers and sisters are dealing with first India under British Empire, then the struggle against the empire, and the new emerging nation that subordinates, overlooks 2,000 years of caste, even though you're constituting yourself as a nation, having pushed out the British. So that the juxtaposition is very different, but the similarity is the ways in which the Dalit peoples have been able to love in the face of a hatred, preserve integrity, honesty, and decency. You need to have examples to the world. That's why Ambedkar and the others are very important. I'll tell you a story before we leave. Abraham Joshua Heschel, when he went to Cincinnati, he said he met the finest human being he ever met in America. He was a black man who served as the head of the cafeteria in the Hebrew College in Cincinnati. And Heschel would go to his church, his Black Baptist church in Cincinnati. That changed Heschel's life. It gave him a different view of America. I'm supposed to come to America and see the yellow brick road as voluntary immigrants or involuntary immigrants do. Lo and behold, I meet someone who's on the underside of America who happens to be an exemplification of an integrity it's hard to find on the other side of town. That would change your life. It would give you a different lens through which you view the world. Well, see, that particular person is just like Coltrane, just like Martin King, just like Fannie Lou Hamer. They're decent people. And when you meet decent people, they have impact on you. When you hear the music of a Mary Lou Williams, that has impact on you. You can feel the humanity, the decency, the subtlety, and the love. The Dalit peoples have the same thing. We have to make it visible so that the nation, the world, has to take note. You got all these Ambedkar-like Dalits. All of them around. I mean, not every Dalit is an Ambedkar, we know that, but every Negro is not a Martin King. But you have all these Ambedkar-like Dalits. People need to know them, interact with them, get a sense of who they are. We need movies with Dalit reality, Dalit humanity. We need novels. We need songs. We need hip-hop artists who sing songs about the relation of Dalit struggles and Ferguson. We need poets who can make that connection. Then the scholars will be there and say, now we got an analysis for you.
That is a beautiful way to conclude this conference. Can I please thank our panelists for a very inspiring session.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. This has been absolutely a fabulous opening to the conference. I think we're really building right here and now a transnational, transcultural community, and I thank you for doing that with us. I wish to introduce Sanjay Bhagat, who is the president of the Boston Study Group. Sanjay.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Sanjay Bhagat, and I'm president of Boston Study Group, a co-sponsor for this prestigious conference of 3 days here. So for last 3 years, the Boston conference, Brandeis conference is happening. And when we were not even the Boston Study Group, since then we are trying to support this conference as much as possible. And very first year, even this Boston Study Group didn't exist as an organization. We tried to get as many people from the New York, New Jersey, and Philadelphia to come over here so that we can show that how much this conference is meant for the Ambedkarite people in this USA. And since then, last year we were having a little bit more impact on this conference, and this year we are like a partner to this conference. When this conference is happening, we came to know that Lisa Lynch, who is the provost of this Brandeis University, is a helping hand for this conference. She has done so much to make sure that this particular conference takes place every year. And this year when we proposed to install bust of Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, she didn't take even 1 or 2 days to approve. And then that was so fascinating, and that's why we wanted to honor her on behalf of the Boston Study Group. So Lisa, please. Noted about Lisa, and that is what I will read about. Lisa earned her BA in Economics and Political Science at Wellesley College and her MSc and PhD in Economics at the London School of Economics. Thus, Lisa and Dr. B.R. Ambedkar both share the same alma mater, London School of Economics. In lobby of Clement House in 1973, and a bust was unveiled at Thames Gallery of Old Building in 1994. That historic moment for Brandeis is going to happen tomorrow. Yeah, so we are very pleased to honor Lisa for her work for advancing the social justice agenda and Dr. Ambedkar's legacy forward at Brandeis University. As we unveil Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar's bust tomorrow in the Gold Harbor Library, it is a great prestige for us to honor her today by giving her a memento and a shawl.
I'm so overwhelmed. Sanjay, as you were talking about what had happened with the Boston Study Group, I remember 3 years ago when we first started talking together in Thorat, when you came and you were visiting here. This was a dream. Thorat, I remember talking with you about your collaboration with Sandy Darity and the work on discrimination as two economists focused on this. We had so many connections. And you're absolutely right. I mean, as an LSE alum and knowing the impact that institution's had on many people, to know that tomorrow we'll be able to have Ambedkar's bust unveiled in our university is very moving, and I thank you. I'm humbled by this, and I will put this on my desk and see him every day and be inspired by his legacy.
On behalf of the Boston Study Group, we would like to welcome our 3 great speakers here. So,
Dr. Jebaroja.
yeah.
So please do join us at the reception down the hall.